Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Captain Nick Tate. We warmly welcome the family of Lieutenant Colonel Austin George Fenton, whose story will be told shortly. We are honoured to acknowledge Minister Damien English, Minister of State for Housing and Urban Development, Ireland, and Mr Eamon Robinson, Deputy Head of Mission, Embassy of Ireland. We also warmly welcome this year's Simpson Prize winners and the Federation of Pontian Associations Australia. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family, visitors and students on behalf of the following school. From Tasmania, St Helens District High School. Please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Children, please sit. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Lieutenant Colonel Austin George Fenton. Austin Fenton was born in North Sydney on the 28th day of July in 1905, the son of Alfred and Constance Fenton. After receiving his education at North Sydney High School, Austin worked as a journalist. After a cadetship in the Sydney office of the Newcastle Morning Herald, he moved to Newcastle, where he worked for the paper as a sub-editor. He married Dorothy Helen Fenton, and the couple went on to have 3 children, Adrian, Helen and Ian. At the outbreak of the Second World War, the family were living in Newcastle suburb of Merewether. Enlisting as soon as the Second World War began in September 1939, Fenton first served in Greece and the Middle East, working in press relations for the Intelligence Corps and the Australian Government Censor. Working as a government censor was a difficult task that required knowledge of military operations. With this background in local militias and journalism, Austin was well placed to maintain positive relationships between the press and the military. The official history of Australia in the Second World War singles out Fenton as bringing professionalism in journalism and military intelligence to this role. His work was noted by the authorities, and he received several promotions throughout his career, reaching the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. Returning to Australia in 1942, he transferred to the Army Intelligence Directorate in Public Relations. In August, he arrived in Papua to work as the Assistant Director of Public Relations and later as the Liaison Officer at General Headquarters. Austin believed that press correspondents should get as close to the war effort as possible, and that as censor, it was as much his role to assist the press to get stories that they could send home as it was to censor. Noel Monks, an American correspondent in New Guinea, described him as the most competent censor in the Southwest Pacific. Recognising his abilities, in 1943 he was mentioned in dispatches for gallant and distinguished services. By 1944, Fenton had played an integral role in many of Australia's most important battlegrounds. The military history section, responsible for recording and eventually writing the official history of Australia's role in the Second World War, recognised his experience and, in July 1944, seconded him for duty to work gathering information on Australia's war in the Southwest Pacific. On the 28th of January 1945, Austin boarded a Beaufort aircraft in Port Moresby, bound for Lae. The aircraft took off from the Ward airstrip at 7 a.m. and was never heard of from again. Fenton and all the members of the aircraft were officially pronounced as assumed killed nearly a month later. He was 39 years old. His contribution to the Australian war effort was recognised in 1945 when he was posthumously awarded an MBE for his meritorious service and exceptional devotion to duty. The Governor-General presented the insignia for this prestigious honour to Fenton's son Adrian at Admiralty House in January 1949. 16 years after its disappearance, the wreckage of the missing aircraft was spotted in the thick jungle on Mount Kenevi, to the south of Kokoda. A team sent to examine the crash site found Austin's identification discs, and his body was finally laid to rest in the Port Moresby Bomana War Cemetery. His name is listed on the roll of honour on my left amongst almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lieutenant Colonel Austin George Fenton, MBE, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and for the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many men lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain had thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. Thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.